Captain Ryan Hayes stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the stars pass by like tiny diamonds in the endless black void of space, and he had been traveling for 3 years, now leading humanity into the unknown regions beyond Earth and nothing prepared him for what was about to happen on this particular day, when the distress signal came through the communications array and lit up every screen on the bridge. With urgent red warnings, the signal came from a planet they had marked on there. Maps is Kepler 442d. It was supposed to be empty, but someone was down there calling for help, and Ryan gave the order to descend through the thick atmosphere and land on the surface, where ancient forests grew so tall they seemed to touch the sky itself, and mountains made of crystal reflected sunlight in rainbow colors that hurt the eyes. When the landing team stepped out of the ship, they found something impossible standing in a clearing, surrounded by smoking wreckage of strange machines, and a woman knelt beside a massive creature that looked like a dragon from old Earth legends, and the dragon was dying, with each breath coming slow and painful, while black blood pooled beneath its body. The woman had silver hair that fell down her back like a waterfall of moonlight, and her eyes were the color of violets in spring, and when she looked up at Ryan, it felt like she could see straight through him to his very soul. And she wore armor covered in battle scars, but decorated with symbols that spoke of royalty and power beyond anything he had ever seen. She spoke in perfect English, even though her lips did not match the words, and Ryan realized she was using some kind of magic to translate, and she said, "Please help my companion, Shadowfang, because he has been poisoned by the machines called Void Reapers, and your technology might save him when our magic cannot." Lieutenant Amy Carter rushed forward with her medical supplies and began working on the dragon, while Ryan learned that the woman was Queen Seraphina Moonwhisper, and she ruled something called the Starwood, elven kingdoms across multiple star systems and the Void Reapers were hunting her because she had refused to surrender her people to be harvested like crops. Hours passed while Amy worked miracles, combining human medicine with the healing spells that Seraphina cast with her hands glowing silver and gold, and finally the dragon, named Shadowfang, began breathing easier, and his eyes opened to look at the humans who had saved him, and the queen broke down crying with relief as she pressed her forehead against the dragon's snout. Ryan felt exhausted after watching the tense medical procedure, and without thinking, he turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Danny Foster, and said, with diplomatic skills like hers and that kind of power, she would make someone a perfect wife, and it is a shame. She's probably a queen, with a dozen suitors waiting in line. The communication channel was not private, like Ryan thought, and every word went out on the open frequency, and Seraphina's pointed ears twitched as she turned to stare at Ryan with an intensity that Beta's heart stopped beating for a moment, and her violet eyes seemed to glow within her light. She said, "You propose marriage to me, Captain Ryan Hayes." And then, without waiting for him to respond, she said, "I accept your proposal." Ryan's brain stopped working, and he stammered, "Wait, what? No, I was just joking around with my crew, and I did not mean anything serious by those words." Seraphina stood up with the grace of someone who had ruled for centuries, and she said, "Among my people, to speak of marriage to royalty in a moment of life-death is considered a sacred proposal, and you saved Shadowfang, who is my dearest companion, and you spoke the words of marriage, and by the ancient laws of my people, and by my own free will, I accept your suit." And then she smiled at him and asked, "Unless you wish to dishonor your own words spoken before witnesses." Danny Foster was trying very hard not to laugh out loud, and Amy Carter had her recording device out to capture this moment for history, and Ryan realized he had just accidentally proposed marriage to an alien queen who had a dragon, and somehow, despite how crazy this was, he could not bring himself to say, nor Ryan managed to say, "I suppose we should talk about this situation like reasonable adults." Seraphina nodded and said, "Indeed. We shall discuss the terms, but first we must prepare for battle, because the Void Reapers tracked me to this planet, and they will arrive within 3 days, and when they come, they will try to kill every living thing here, just to get to me." And she looked at him with eyes full of determination and said, "You saved my dearest companion, and now I shall teach you and your people how to fight the greatest threat this galaxy has ever known." Shad Fung made a deep rumbling sound like thunder rolling across mountains, and his golden eyes fixed on Ryan with what might have been approval or possibly amusement at the human's predicament, and the dragons seemed to be smiling if dragons could smile. Ryan Hayes had woken up that morning as a simple colony ship captain exploring new worlds for humanity, and now he was going to sleep engaged to an elven queen with a dragon for a companion and standing on the edge of an interstellar war that could determine the fate of all organic life in the galaxy. The crew of his ship started making preparations for the coming battle, while Seraphina began teaching them about the Void Reapers and their weapons and tactics, and Ryan kept catching himself looking at the Queen and wondering how his life had gotten so strange. So quickly humanity was about to announce itself to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible, and it all started with one joke that turned into a proposal that became a promise that would change everything for everyone involved in ways none of them could predict. Danny Foster clapped Ryan on the shoulder and said, "Congratulations on your engagement, Captain," and Ryan just shook his head because what else could he do except move forward and face whatever came next with this impossible alliance beside him. The crew had 48 hours to transform from explorers into warriors, and Seraphina wasted no time in teaching them everything she knew about fighting the Void Reapers, and she stood in the cargo bay with Shadowfang coiled behind her like a living mountain of scales and muscles. She projected images from a crystal device on her wrist, and the holograms showed nightmare machines with sleek, angular bodies that seemed to absorb light itself, and ground units that moved like predators hunting prey. And she explained that the Void Reapers do not negotiate or show mercy, and they harvest organic matter to fuel their expansion across the galaxy. Ryan studied the enemy ships and asked what are their weaknesses, because every enemy has a weakness. Even if they seem invincible, Shadowfang spoke for the first time in a voice that rumbled through the deck plates and made the walls vibrate, and he said their weakness is arrogance, because they believe themselves superior to all organic life, and they will not expect humans to fight effectively. Seraphina added that they are vulnerable to concentrated energy weapons combined with chaos magic, and your plasma cannons, modified with my enchantments, could actually hurt them over the next 2 days. An impossible collaboration began between human technology and elven magic, and Lieutenant Amy Carter worked with Seraphina to create hybrid weapons that combined both sciences, and Chief Engineer Kate Morrison discovered that the ship's reactor could produce 3 times more power by using crystals from Shadowfang's hoard, which the dragon gave freely. Kate was not afraid of the massive dragon, and Shadowfang seemed to like the engineer, who kept poking at his scales and asking questions about dragon biology, and he told her that humans do not fear what they do not understand. Instead, they study it and measure it and make it work for them. Dragon turned his massive head toward Ryan, who was setting up defensive positions, and said, "Seraphina has refused 17 noble suitors over the past century, and she could have corrected your joke with a single word, but she chose not." Torian looked up surprised and asked, "What do you mean by that?" before Shadowfang could answer. The alarms started blaring across the ship, and 3 massive Void Reaper vessels emerged from the void of space, followed by hundreds of smaller craft, all heading straight for the planet Tryon. Shouted battle stations, and turned to Seraphina and started to search. "Say you should take Shadowfang and escape while we hold them off." Seraphina cut him off with flashing eyes and said, "If you are about to suggest we flee, let me remind you that by your own words and my acceptance, you are my betrothed, and where you fight, I fight, and where you stand, Shadowfang, and I stand beside you, Donnie." Foster grinned from his station and said, "I like her, Captain, and you should definitely marry this one." The first wave of enemy fighters screamed through the atmosphere and met a defense they had not anticipated, because the upgraded weapons tore through their formations. The plasma bolts wrapped in crackling silver magic, and on the ground human marines in powered armor fought alongside magical constructs that Seraphina animated. Then Shadowfang launched himself from the mountain peak where he had been waiting, and he flew like a living missile of scales and fury, and his breath weapon was not fire but concentrated starlight that unmade the Reaper ships at the molecular level, and human pilots whooped over the communications as they followed. In his wake, Seraphina stood beside Ryan on the bridge with her hands weaving patterns in the air, and shields of pure magic reinforced the ship's deflectors, and when an enemy boarding pod latched onto the hull, she simply closed her fist and the entire pod crumpled like paper. Called out, "They are retreating," and her voice was full of disbelief. The Void Reaper forces pulled back in disarray because they had expected an easy hunt, and instead found a queen with a dragon and a species that turned every challenge into an opportunity to overcome obstacles through pure stubborn determination. As the enemy's ships fled, Ryan turned to Serafina, who was breathing hard from exhaustion, but her eyes shone with triumph, and without thinking, he took her hand. He said that was incredible. She squeezed his hand back and smiled, and said that was just the first skirmish, and they will return with a true war fleet. But now they know what we both know, Ryan asked. What is that? Serafina said, that humanity's greatest weapon is not your technology or tactics, but the fact that you make the impossible become real through sheer stubborn determination. And now with my people and yours united, we will show the Reapers something they have never seen before. Shadowfang landed on the mountain with a thud that shook the ground, and he roared his challenge to the stars above and in the cargo bay. Human and elven engineers were already sharing designs and learning each other's languages and forging something completely. Nurin realized he was still holding Serafina's hand, and she had not let go either. He said carefully so about this marriage arrangement. She said with a mischievous smile, we will discuss terms later, because first we plan a war, and then if we survive, we plan a wedding. Rian found himself smiling back and said, yeah, that sounds acceptable to me. Annie Foster's voice came over the communication system, saying Shadowfang wants to know if you need a dragon-sized formal wear for the ceremony, because he says black is definitely his color. Even surrounded by the wreckage of battle, everyone on the bridge started laughing, and Ryan thought that humanity had found allies and purpose, and a war worth fighting. And one captain had found something among the stars that he never expected to find in his entire life. News of the battle spread across human space faster than light itself, and within 1 week, the Colonial Defense Fleet sent 3 more ships to the planet, now renamed New Terra in honor of the Alliance. But it was not just human reinforcements that Ariser Athena sent a message across the elven communication networks that spanned multiple galaxies, and the response exceeded all expectations when a massive portal ripped open the fabric of space itself. 2 elven warships emerged with hulls made of living wood, embedded with crystalline weapons and sails that caught solar winds like ancient ships once caught ocean breezes, and behind them came supply vessels and medical frigates, and a diplomatic ship carrying Serafina's younger sister, Princess Lyra Moonwhisper, appeared on the bridge in a flash of silver light and took one look at Ryan and burst out laughing so hard she had to hold her sides. She said, this is the human who accidentally proposed to my sister in Syrah. He is barely past his 2nd century, and he is practically an infant. Serafina looked embarrassed and said, Lyra, humans age differently, and he is 32 years old, which is considered fully mature for his species. Lyra's eyes went wide, and she said, 32 years. And by the stars, you are courting someone whose entire lifespan shorter than our childhood, and how delightfully scandalous. Ryan decided he liked Lyra immediately, even as Danny Foster looked ready to collapse from trying not to laugh out loud, but the humor died when Admiral Thalion Starwind brought news that made everyone go silent, and he explained that the Void Reapers were not just sending a larger fleet, but redirecting one of their harvester Titans, which was a moon-sized vessel capable of stripping entire planets of all life. Thalion said grimly, it will arrive in 30 days, and even with our combined fleets, we cannot destroy such a vessel, and we can only hope to evacuate as many people as possible before it arrives, Syrian said. Unacceptable, and his voice cut through the despair like a knife, and everyone turned to look at him, and he said, we are not evacuating because we are going to kill that thing. The room went completely silent, and then Shadowfang, who had been quietly listening from his perch on the mountain, rumbled his approval and said, finally, a proper challenge worthy of my attention. Followed was the most ambitious military planning in human history, as engineers from both species worked around the clock without sleep, and Kate Morrison discovered that elven portal technology could be modified to work with human slipspace drives, creating instant travel across vast distances. Ami Carter found that mixing dragon's blood, which Shadowfang gave voluntarily, with human combat stimulants created soldiers who could react at superhuman speeds and interface directly with magical constructs. The Real breakthrough came from Ryan's casual comment about humanity's old nuclear arsenals that had been mothballed centuries ago because they were too destructive. Serafina looked at him with sudden inspiration and asked, "Could you modify them and enchant them?" Ryan asked to do what exactly. She explained that Harvester Titans have a massive reactor core that powers their planet-killing weapons, and if they could get a weapon inside wrapped in a magical shell that prevents detection until detonation, they could turn the enemy's greatest weapon into their tomb. The plan was insane and required a strike team to infiltrate the Titan and plant the device and escape before it exploded, and the tactical computer calculated survival rates at less than 3%. Ryan immediately volunteered, along with Danny and Amy and Kate, and Princess Lyra also volunteered, which made Serafina very angry. Serafina said flatly, "You are not going, little sister." Lyra responded that Serafina did not command her on the battlefield because Admiral Thalion does, and he approved her inclusion. And then Lyra's playful manner vanished, and she said, "I am the best portal mage in the entire fleet, and you need Mitha." Argument lasted for hours until Shadowfang settled it by announcing he would carry the strike team himself because no ship is faster than a dragon who is properly motivated, and he was very motivated to see these machines burn. Training became intense as human marines learned to move in zero gravity while wearing enchanted armor and elven commandos practiced with human weapons, and Ryan found himself spending late nights with Serafina planning tactics and increasingly just talking. One night, as they stood on a mountain peak watching Shadowfang teach human pilots aerial maneuvers, Ryan asked, "Why did you really accept my proposal? Because you could have corrected my mistake." Isla Serafina was quiet for a long time and then said, "I have ruled for 300 years and seen empires rise and fall and fought wars that lasted generations, and in all that time, do you know what I never saw?" And asked. What she said, someone who looked at the impossible and simply decided to make it possible instead, and your people do not know enough to understand when something cannot be done, so you just do it anyway. And when you made that joke, you were not thinking about politics or alliances, but just said what you felt. Trian asked, "And if we survive this mission," Serafina said, "then we will see if a queen and a captain can build something as impossible as the alliance we have created. But first we have a Titan to kill." The day of the assault arrived, and the Harvester Titan emerged from slip space like a mountain of twisted metal and malevolent purpose, and its weapons began charging to target. New Terra Shadfeng launched with the strike team clinging to his back, protected by magical shields, and around them the combined fleet engaged the Titan's escorts, creating a corridor of chaos and destruction. "Destruction to knee," Foster shouted for humanity. Lyra cried for the Starwood Kingdom. Shadowfang roared for showing these machines what happens when you threaten our family, and they dove straight into hell itself as the war for the galaxy's future truly began. The interior of the Harvester Titan was a nightmare, made real with walls that pulsed with sickly green light and machinery that seemed to breathe like a living thing, and the air itself felt wrong and recycled, and dead Shadowfang had punched through the outer hall in a blaze of starlight and deposited the strike team in what looked like a massive processing chamber, and the walls were covered in strange symbols that hurt to look at. Directly, Kate Morrison checked her scanner and said, "The core is 12 kilometers deeper through multiple security zones, and we have maybe 40 minutes before the Titans' weapons finished charging and fire on New Terrarian." Activated his tactical map, and Lyra overlaid it with magical sensors that revealed pathways the technology could not detect, and together, human science and elven magic created a complete picture of the route ahead. Danny Foster observed there are two routes, and the direct path through main corridors are Lyra's magical conduits, and the conduits are faster but more dangerous. An alarm shrieked through the chamber, and Void Reaper security drones poured from openings in the walls. Metal spiders with plasma cutters and weapons that could disrupt neural patterns, Rayan shouted. "Conduits it is, and Lyra, get us moving." Now the princess raised her hands, glowing with silver light, and reality bent around them as a portal opened, and the team tumbled through into a network of energy channels that ran through the Titan like veins. Carrying power, they emerged in a massive chamber, but they were not alone, because a Void Reaper commander stood waiting, and it was a towering machine whose body seemed to shift between dimensions, and its voice sounded like dying stars. "Commander," said Organic Filth, You bring the dragon touched and the star speakers together, and how quaint, and how utterly. Feudal Amy Carter opened fire with her plasma rifle wrapped in enchantments, but the commander blocked it with a shield of pure void energy. And Danny launched missiles, and Lyra cast binding spells, but nothing could penetrate its defenses. The commander stated, "Your defiance is noted and irrelevant. We will be processed into fuel for our expansion." Then Shadowfang's roar shook the entire chamber, because the dragon had been following them through the superstructure too. Large to fit in most corridors, but refusing to be separated from his allies, and now he unleashed starlight through a ventilation shaft. Concentrated beam struck the commander from behind, and its shields flickered for just a moment. Crayon saw the opening and shouted, "Kate, the device now." Engineer pulled out the modified nuclear warhead from her pack, and it was a sleek cylinder wrapped in elven runes that pulsed with contained magical energy, but they were still too far from the core. Lear said suddenly, "I can get you there with a portal jump, but it is one way, and someone has to stay behind to anchor the spells." Raffina's voice crackled over the communication link from where she coordinated the fleet battle outside, and she said, "Lyra, do not you dare." Lyra smiled and pressed something into Ryan's hand, and it was a crystalline key, and she said, "Tell Captain Hayes he had better survive this, because I want to dance at your wedding, dear sister." Then she began weaving the most complex spell Ryan had ever witnessed. The portal exploded into existence as a swirling vortex of silver light leading directly to the Titan's core, and through it Ryan could see a massive reactor that was a churning mass of stolen energy and dark matter. Lyra screamed "Go" as the commander recovered, and more drones flooded into the chamber and grabbed Kate and Danny and dove through the portal, and Amy hesitated, but then followed, and behind them Lyra's magic flared bright enough to blind all the cameras. They emerged in a chamber that defied the laws of physics, because the core was not just a reactor but a prison, and thousands of energy signatures swirled within it, and Ryan realized with horror they were souls of harvested organic beings converted into power. Kate whispered through tears, "These monsters are burning people as fuel." Danny helped Kate set up the device, and the timer was configured for 5 minutes. And the runes would prevent detection until detonation, and the yield would chain react with the core, destroying the entire Titan. Rion called over the communication link, "Lyra, we need extraction now, only." Static answered. Damie tried the backup channel and said, "Lyra, please respond." Still nothing but empty static. Then Seraphina's voice came through, raw with grief and rage, and she said, "Lyra held off the commander long enough for you to reach the core, but she did not make it, and she anchored a return portal, and the key she gave you, Ryan, activate it." Norian looked at the crystal in his hand, and it was warm and pulsing with fading magic, and it was Lyra's last gift to them. He activated it, and a portal opened, but it was unstable and flickering like a candle in the wind. Ryan ordered everyone through now, and Kate dove in, followed by Danny and Amy. Grabbed Ryan's arm, she said, "Captain, we go together or not?" At Alan. Explosion rocked the chamber, and the timer on the device showed 3 minutes. But something had damaged the mechanism, and the countdown was accelerating out of control. Kate shouted through the portal, "The device is compromised, and Ryan, if you do not leave in 30 seconds, you will not make it out alive." Ryan looked at the core full of trapped souls, and then at the portal where his team waited, and where Seraphina waited. He made his choice in that moment. He said, "Amy, go and tell Seraphina I am sorry about missing the wedding." Amy cried, "No, Ryan, you cannot." But he pushed her through the portal and shattered the crystal, and the portal collapsed, leaving him alone in the heart of the monster. Ryan Hayes did what humanity always did best, which was improvise and adapt, and he ran to the device and pulled out Kate's tools and began rewiring, because if he was dying here, he would make absolutely certain this thing took the Titan with it above in space. Shadowfang felt his companion's distress through their bond, and the dragon roared and dove away from the fleet battle, doing something no dragon had done in 1,000 years, which was phased partially out of reality, becoming temporarily incorporeal to slip through the densest armor. Seraphina felt it too, through the connection growing between her and Ryan, and she closed her eyes and reached deep into her magic, speaking a word of power that her mother taught her. And it was a spell that could only be used once in a lifetime. In the core chamber, Ryan was finishing his work when reality tore open, and it was not a portal, but something stranger and Shadowfang's massive head emerged from thin air with Seraphina, standing on his snout blazing with power. She said, "You absolute fool." But she was smiling, even as tears streamed down her face, and she said, "Did you really think I would let you miss our wedding?" Ryan said. "But the device," Seraphina said, "is set to detonate in 45 seconds, and I know." And she said, "Shadowfang, if you please." The dragon opened his jaws and they jumped inside, which felt insane. But Ryan was beyond questioning anything, and Shadowfang phased again, slipping between dimensions, carrying them through layers of the Titan that did not exist in normal space. They emerged outside the hull, just as the device detonated. The explosion was beautiful and terrible as the warhead, triggered a cascade in the core, and all those trapped souls were released in a supernova of pure life energy. And the Titan did not just explode, but was unmade and erased from existence in a flash brighter. Then the system Star the Void Reaper fleet fled in terror, and the Alliance had won, but the cost was high, because Princess Lyra was gone, sacrificed so others could complete the mission A's. Shadowfang carried Ryan and Seraphina back to the fleet. Neither spoke because there would be time for words later. Now there was only the aftermath of victory and the heavy weight of loss. 3 months after the Titan's destruction, New Terra had transformed into something beautiful and impossible with human buildings, standing alongside elven structures grown from living crystal, and in the markets traders from both species haggled. In a new language that combined their two worlds, human children and elven children played together in the streets, teaching each other games and magic and technology and creating friendships that would shape the future of both civilizations. Void Reapers had gone silent, retreating to lick their wounds, and intelligence reports suggested they were terrified because they could not understand an alliance that combined magic and technology and emotion with logic. But today was not about war, and it was about a promise kept. The ceremony was held on the mountain peak where Shadowfang had first landed after the great battle, and half the clearing was decorated in human tradition with white chairs and a flower arch, and music played by a string quartet. The other half honored elven customs with floating crystals that sang in perfect harmonics and trees that wept silver sap in blessing, and a circle of ancient standing stones that predated the current age of the galaxy admiral. Talion stood as the one to perform the ceremony, and he would blend both cultures into something new, and the human fleet sent representatives including Vice Admiral Laura Chen, who flew in specifically to witness what she called the craziest diplomatic marriage in all of history. Ryan stood at the altar in his dress uniform with Danny Foster beside him as best man, and he was terrified and exhilarated and completely certain this was exactly where he wanted to be. Then Seraphina appeared, and everyone fell completely silent. She wore armor and silk together, refusing to be just a warrior, queen, or just a bride, but both at once, and her silver hair was adorned with flowers that glowed with soft inner light, and she walked alone, as was elven tradition. Because she needed no one to give her away, she had always belonged only to herself, until now when she reached Ryan, she took his hands and he saw tears in her violet eyes. She whispered, "I miss her so much." Shurian said quietly, "I know, and I feel it too. But Lyra is here with USA's." If in answer, a silver butterfly appeared, which was Lyra's favorite magical signature, and it landed on Seraphina's shoulder. Before fading into sparkles of light, the ceremony proceeded with vows exchanged in traditional human promises were interwoven with elven oaths that bound souls across lifetimes, and when Thalion asked for the ring, Shadowfang rumbled forward carrying 2 bands on his nose. One ring was platinum inscribed with runes, and the other was a human wedding band enhanced with a fragment of dragon scale admiral. Thalion declared, "By the authority vested in me by the Starwood Kingdoms and recognized by the United Human Colonial Government, I pronounce you bound in matrimony and partners in life, in battle, and you may kiss your bride." Captain Rian did, and the crowd erupted with sound as human marines cheered and elven nobles applauded with elegant restraint, and Shadowfang roared so loudly that 3 glasses shattered on nearby tables. Reception that followed was chaotic perfection, with human whiskey served alongside elven star wine, and the band played everything from classical earth music to ancient elven ballads that were thousands of years. Old Kate Morrison got drunk and challenged an elven archmage to an engineering debate that somehow ended with them collaborating on a new shield design right there at the reception as. Celebration continued, Ryan, and Seraphina slipped away to a quieter overlook with a view of the stars, and Shadowfang joined them, settling down with a contented rumble. Ron said, "So we are married, and to be honest, I never planned this far ahead in my life," Seraphina laughed, and it was a sound he had come to treasure more than anything, and she said, "Neither did I when I accepted your joke, but here we are against all odds." Rianne echoed, "Here we are in a human captain married to an elven queen, and what do we do now?" Seraphina looked up at the stars where human ships and elven vessels patrolled together in perfect coordination, and she said, "Now we build something that has never existed before, and an alliance not just of convenience, but of genuine partnerships." Continued, "We show the galaxy that different species and different cultures and different ways of understanding the universe can come together and create something stronger than the sum of its parts." Ran said, "That is a pretty ambitious goal for a married couple." Seraphina smiled and said, "Well, we started this relationship with you accidentally, proposing and me accepting to bind you to ancient law, so I think we can handle ambitious projects." Hadfang snorted and said, "And when the Void Reapers return, because they will eventually," Rianne and Seraphina exchanged a look and spoke simultaneously. Saying "we will be ready at chime" on Ryan's communicator interrupted their moment, and Danny Foster's face appeared looking sheepish, and he said, "Sorry to interrupt. Honeymoon planning, but we have incoming ships, and a lot of them re-intensed," but Seraphina placed a calming hand on his arm and said, "Wait and listen on. The tactical display the ships resolved into clear images, and they were not Void Reapers but other species from across the galaxy, and dozens of them sent broadcasts in multiple languages, all saying variations of the same message. They said, 'We heard about the alliance, and we heard about the victory, and we want to join youth.' Messages came from the Avarian bird people, whose worlds had been scoured by the Reapers and the Stoneclad, who were living rock beings that had lost entire planets, and the Whisper folk, who were energy beings hiding for century species that had been fighting alone and dying alone, were now reaching out in hope." Ryan looked at Seraphina, and she looked back at him, and neither needed to speak because they had already made the decision together. Anne said to Danny, "Tell them that New Terra welcomes all who stand against the darkness." As messages of acceptance went out to the incoming ships, Seraphina leaned against Ryan, watching their impossible alliance grow even larger, and she asked, "Do you know what the poets will say about Usran?" Asked what will they say, she said that a human captain made a joke, and an elven queen took it seriously, and together they changed the fate of an entire galaxy, and they will probably get it wrong and turn it into a grand romance, when really it was just two people deciding to keep choosing each other. Every single Darien kissed her forehead and said, "I can live with that version, though. For the record, it is a pretty grand romance." Seraphina laughed and said, "This comes from the man who proposed by accident," Tryon countered, "and this comes from the woman who accepted immediately, without hesitation, groaned dramatically, and said, 'If you two are going to be this insufferably cute, at least let me return to the party, because Kate promised to show me something called fireworks.'" They laughed and let the dragon go, and alone under the stars, Ryan and Seraphina stood together as a captain and a queen and a human and an elf, and a joke that became a proposal that became a marriage that became the foundation of something unprecedented in galactic history. Behind them, the celebration continued with music and laughter, and ahead of them, new allies arrived, with hope in their hearts, and somewhere in the dark between stars, the Void Reapers plotted their return. But for now, in this perfect moment, there was peace and hope, and to people who found each other in the most improbable way possible, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the mistakes you never saw coming. The wedding of Queen Seraphina Moonwhisper and Captain Ryan Hayes would be remembered for thousands of years, not because it was perfect, but because it was real and messy and absolutely impossible, just like humanity itself and just like love.